Hello and welcome to Marketing Global Edition with me, Jasmine Montgomery.
And me, Piers Geiler.
So, Piers, have you seen this week's fascinating exchange of tweets between Elon Musk, current owner of X, and Jack Dorsey, previous owner of what was then Twitter?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, crazy stuff. Jack Dorsey posted, delete all IP law, and Elon Musk did the same. He tweeted back saying, I agree. Madness.
It's absolutely fascinating. So obviously in normal times, we would just consider for a moment what these two guys were smoking and then go back to our lovely lives. But in this day and age, when with, President Musk storming around the Oval Office and tearing down the modus operandi around him, his latest utterance now has to be debated as if it might actually be signed into law next week because, it might.
Surely not. Hope not. No, that would be absolute. No, just no, Jasmine.
No, you think
No.
absolutely not. You think that's crazy.
Crazy.
Okay, well, tempted as I am to write off everything he says as babble from the padded cell, I have to stop and ask: is Musk right? Should we scrap intellectual property law, and what would it mean for brands?
Okay, well, to start with, no, absolutely not. Are you barking mad? It would be an absolute disaster. It would mean that creators all over the world would no longer be paid for their creative output. Writers, photographers, artists, scientists, designers, inventors, they'd all cease to be able to make a living from their creative and innovative output. So why would they do it anymore? Why would they continue?
Okay, so you think it's crazy. I am going to take the side of crazy for the purposes of the podcast and no comments about how much that reflects me in real life. And I'm going to see if I can make a strong argument. I can't actually quote Musk or Dorsey in terms of why they believe that, because they haven't really elaborated on why they want it scrapped. I mean, some might argue that it's because it's getting in the way of stuff they want to do with training their AI models. Of course, that would be a very cynical reason to scrap it.
Yeah, especially when they've built their own businesses on the back of patents and trademarks. Crazy.
Although, to be fair to Musk, which of course I hate to do, he has come out and said that he won't sue anyone for using Tesla technology as long as they're using it in good faith.
Yeah, right. Tesla's got over 3,404 patents globally, so his legal advisors clearly believe in protecting their IP, even if the boss doesn't, or at least doesn't in his tweets. I mean, it's easy to tweet some nonsense about stopping IP law or anything. He's clearly not walking the talk.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to be anti-IP when it blocks you from doing things. But when someone infringes your IP, then suddenly the lawyers dust off their robes, everybody reaches for their cease and desist order, and courtrooms turn into battlegrounds of kind of creativity versus capitalism. So yes, Musk defends his own IP, interestingly. But I am interested in the arguments for abolishing IP law going forward.
Okay, but maybe we should first just define briefly what qualifies as IP or intellectual property.
Okay, my learned friend, break it down for us.
Okay, he cracks his knuckles. Quite a few things actually. So copyright protects original works of authorship. So things like books, literature, music, film, software, anything where human creativity is captured in a fixed form. You don't even need to file anything. In most places, it's automatic the moment the work is created. Trademarks, they're the semiotics of the marketplace. So logos, brand names, even colours and sounds. They just, you can protect things like the golden arches, the word Google, the sound of a Harley Davidson's exhaust note, that swoosh on your trailers. And then there's patents, which cover gadgets, processes, methods, biological breakthroughs. And what they do is they grant temporary monopolies in exchange for disclosure. So that's a really lovely, elegant trade-off between innovation and public benefit. But the catch is it must be novel, non-obvious and useful.
Yeah, great, thanks. So actually, it's really interesting because some American commentator on this pointed out that the Constitution in the States doesn't talk about intellectual property for the sake of the livelihoods of creators, but actually for the public good, which I find really interesting. Anyway, you've brilliantly outlined the basis for the legal framework that Musk and Dorsey want to scrap.
Okay. So are there any good arguments for this, Jasmine?
On reflection, I think there are. At first I kind of went, what? And then I thought about it and did some reading. And, there are some really interesting arguments. Okay, so one of them is that it creates artificial scarcity. So in a world where actually ideas these days with digital are really abundant, and if I share something with you, if I share a piece of music I've written with you or a piece of writing, it doesn't actually take away from me necessarily. And there are people who think that in a digital age where copying essentially doesn't cost anything, enforcing scarcity feels like trying to bottle air. There are arguments that it hinders innovation rather than promoting it. So, some people argue that strong IP actually stifles innovation in tech and pharmaceuticals, right? So patents can block new entrants, make it harder for smaller innovators to break into the market. Some people are really kind of protecting their copyright, like Disney has spent years lobbying to keep Mickey Mouse, which was the copyright was going to expire, so that everybody could now use it and create using a Mickey Mouse, and how fun would that be? And they've kind of hung on to it. People talk about the fact that it exacerbates global inequality. So it often serves the interests of wealthy countries and multinationals at the expense of developing nations, particularly things like life-saving drugs can be unaffordable to the poor. The internet has really changed the game. So pre-internet, if you were controlling copies of a book, that was it was physical, it was limited, you could control it. But now information just flows so freely that basically kind of IP enforcement online is just a game of whack-a-mole. You're just constantly having to take stuff down with every repost. And, some critics are saying that the only long-term solution is to accept the reality of digital abundance and rethink compensation models. Maybe open access, crowdfunding, etc. People talk about the fact that it privileges originality over collective knowledge. So, this sort of romantic idea of a lone creator sitting there creating something on their own isn't necessarily true anymore. We're now in a world where ideas are shared so quickly, and a lot of things are built online in a matter of seconds and shared. It's hard to know who the original author was. How do you pinpoint who really created something? It can be really expensive. So, to enforce IP, you need a lot of, lawyers, lawsuits, takedowns. It tends to favor the powerful. It's incredibly expensive for companies to manage all their IP. Basically, I think we have to ask if any system has created a $22 billion market in IP law, which is enriching millions of lawyers around the world, is it really working for the creators it's supposed to protect, or just for the lawyers who get to fight over it? So, as an example, Apple and Samsung fought each other over their smartphone features for over 15 years, spending like $1 billion doing it. And I just think, what could they have done with that $1 billion? Making the world a better place, making their products better with that $1 billion. And finally, alternatives do exist. There are open source platforms, there are Creative Commons licensing ideas, patent pools. There are other ways to do this. So I think there are some arguments out there that I think have some merit. Tell me your side of the story.
Yeah, poo-hoo. Right. Anyway, what a lot of fluff. Look, here is the argument for IP. Creativity doesn't just fall from the heavens. It takes time, effort, and money. And IP law is the scaffolding that holds up the entire edifice of modern creativity and innovation. Just think about it. Without copyright, why would an author bother spending 5 years researching and writing a novel if someone could just copy it straight away, reprint it, and profit themselves? Why would a filmmaker raise millions to tell a lovely story, finish the film, and then have someone upload it and start selling it themselves, even before they make any money themselves at it? Why should a photographer wake up at 4 a.m. with all their kit they've had for years and all their experience to capture a moment if someone's just going to steal it? What about authenticity? Trademarks, they're not just corporate fluff, they're signals that help us to navigate modern life. They tell you if this cream is from Nivea or if, as opposed to a counterfeit of God knows what's in it. Trust really matters, And I think IP laws have been abused, but the duration of copyright could do with a trim. And patent trolls are a real menace, but it's not the reason to tear the whole thing down. They are really good. There's just some pruning and reforming to help there, I think.
I just want to raise one point about patent trolls. There are some companies that all they do is buy patents. One good reason to abolish them in the first place is we don't know how to pronounce it. But and then all they do is just run around suing smaller, innovative businesses who are infringing somebody's patent. Anyway, go ahead. You're making a good argument.
So IP law is like, it's commercial lifeblood. We forget how much of our economy runs on intellectual property. So music, fashion, software, publishing, pharmaceuticals, advertising. They don't run on good vibes. They run on legal frameworks that let people create without the fear of being immediately copied and crushed. It's about fairness. It's not just about money. It's all about fairness. If you've made something, a song, a story, a brand, shouldn't you have some say over how it's used? IP law done right doesn't hinder culture. It actually helps it really flourish with credit, compensation, and a fair shot for the next idea. But without it, why would anyone invest in the next big idea? Think about pharmaceuticals. Developing a drug takes years, decades, costs billions sometimes. And without that patent protection, why would they bother? Boom, there you go.
Yeah, and yet, I think that in some ways that's the very industry where IP law does some of its most egregious damage, is in the pharmaceutical category. I mean, it makes life-saving drugs unaffordable for millions. Should the right to profit really trump the right to live? But I think I have to say that I think we should, in this podcast, I think we should focus more on trademarks and copyright, as they're the business we're in, not so much in patents.
Agreed. So, imagine if brands, right, couldn't protect their trademarks. Anyone could make a car and call it Tesla. Musk wouldn't like that, would he?
There you go, Musk.
Yeah. Or maybe, make a phone and call it the Apple iPhone 92. I bet the tech brothers wouldn't like that, would they?
The tech brothers, he says. That's hilarious. It's so funny that you say that. And, I was in Baghdad in 2014 and there were knockoffs everywhere. Because of the US sanctions, brands like Apple couldn't sell in Iraq. But I saw an Apple store. There were quite a few Apple stores around. And the logo was exactly the Apple logo. But hilariously, it was in red. And also the fast food chain. No. It was so funny. I mean, it was selling tech, and it called itself Apple, and it had the exact shape of the Apple logo, but it was red. Yeah. And the fast food chains, like a bunch of Iraqis who had been working in the green zone, had been exposed to US fast food brands that were allowed to be in the green zone to feed the peacekeeping troops and so on, the soldiers. And outside the green zone, you couldn't get KFC, but you could get KPC in exactly the kind of KFC format, exactly the same logo. The only difference was, there's only one tiny letter difference. And I mean, it was knockoff city.
And that's exactly what would happen in London or New York without trademarks, Jasmine.
Okay, well, that's all very well argued. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about intellectual property in the digital age. Should it stay? And if so, what do we need to do to make it better? All right, we're just going to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Marketing Global Edition is sponsored by Adsy, the ad generator for small businesses that serves you effective and affordable ads in seconds. And by 7 Brands, the international advertising and branding agency that has worked with clients around the world from Coca-Cola to Facebook.
Welcome back. We are talking about intellectual property. Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey think that all IP law should be abolished. One of the arguments is that it's just no longer relevant in the digital world.
So I agree that the internet complicates everything. Ideas move at the speed of light. Enforcement is hard, but that doesn't mean the principle is broken.
No, it means the model's outdated. So we're using 18th century copyright law to govern TikTok. So, before the internet, controlling copies of a book or a film or a song made sense, right? Distribution was physical, it was limited. But now information just flows so freely, and enforcing IP online is just crazy. It's just impossible. And I think that accepting the reality of kind of digital abundance and all that sharing and reposting and everything means rethinking compensation models. So, there are people who argue that we should move all the way to open access, kind of crowdfunding, government subsidies for creators, kind of like how science research is funded. And so instead of criminalizing sharing, maybe we should design systems that embrace it.
Like what? Let everyone remix everything for free?
Not necessarily. So Creative Commons licensing gives creators options. So, if you think about something like kind of image libraries where you give, you as a photographer, you retain the rights, but you give Getty or Shutterstock the right to license your image to a user. And YouTube has revenue sharing for music use. There are better ways. Maybe we need to distinguish between theft and tribute online.
But if you abolish trademark and copyright protection, you risk chaos. I mean, who owns a brand? Who gets paid for a hit single? Who stops someone from stealing your identity online?
Yeah, and I mean, who owns culture? Copyright has turned folk songs into lawsuits. Trademarks are being used to suppress parody. So instead of fostering creativity, we've just put everything behind a paywall. I think what's interesting, though, is that in some ways I feel like the genie is out of the bottle, that we already live in a post-intellectual property world, whether we like it or not. A lot of the creatives who are complaining about losing their rights to their work are quite happily giving it away on social media. Instagram was built off of other people's creative work. Photographers have built a multi-billion-dollar asset for Meta off their own backs. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, they're all chock full of other people's work, and those are the people who are complaining about it. I mean, very understandably. But, look, and if you look at trademarks, I mean, sometimes I think the world is just too full. It's just not viable. If you look at trademarks, right, we work with clients all the time who are trying to register trademarks, right? So theoretically, you're supposed to find a completely unique name that's totally ownable in your country, in your category. In reality, we come up with a really distinctive name, and then the client's lawyers find that there are already 50 registrations of that name in their category, in their country. And you spend ages trying to make the name a bit more unique to get it through, registering it with a symbol, for example. But if the trademark register is protecting uniqueness, then why are there already 50 existing marks with the same name in the same class? It's crazy. I think there's just too complicated a world for this stuff now.
I agree. I mean, I think AI is going to make it like 100 times more complex when it comes to things like copyright over images.
Yeah, so if someone has an image that was generated in Midjourney, a generative AI platform, who should have the rights to that image? Is it the owners of Midjourney who own the tech that created it? Is it the person who wrote the prompt for the image, whose idea it was that they should create a rhinoceros on a skateboard with a neon yellow jacket? Is it the person who pays for the Midjourney license, which isn't necessarily the same as the prompter? Is it the thousands, if not millions, of photographers whose work was used to train the AI? It is so hard to know the answer to the question in a co-created world. Who owns the rights?
Look, IP law isn't just about economics. It's about fairness. You make something, you should control it. I think it's that basic.
But who really makes things? I mean, everything is kind of iterative, especially these days. But going back centuries, I mean, Shakespeare borrowed from 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻, hip-hop samples jazz. All creation is a remix. That's more and more true with the ability to co-create online. So I think IP law privileges the final step in a long chain of inspiration and pretends that everything before it just didn't matter.
Yeah, but I think there's got to be a line somewhere. Without some ownership, you get cultural theft. You get people taking ideas without attribution, without consent.
Then maybe the solution is attribution and consent, not control. Maybe the future of creativity is collaborative, open, shared, not fenced off. Okay, Piers, look, what's your final word here in the argument?
Okay, so what makes intellectual property so fascinating is that it sits at the intersection of law, economics, culture, and philosophy. It's about branding. It's about who owns what in the realm of the mind. And in the age of AI-generated art, billion-dollar brands, protecting intellectual output is not just a legal concern, it's a global economic imperative.
Okay, so here's my final word on the subject. Let's not pretend that this is just about protection. IP law is also about power. It's about cultural, economic, even geopolitical power. Who controls the vaccine patent? Who owns the rights to a digital artwork minted on the blockchain? Who profits from indigenous knowledge repackaged by Western pharmaceutical companies? These aren't just legal questions, they're questions of justice, influence, and who gets to win in the age of ideas. I don't know, maybe the argument against IP law isn't simply abolish it and let chaos reign, a la Jack Dorsey, 4 words, abolish IP law. It's that the current system, designed in the printing press age, is no longer fit for purpose. And maybe we should replace it with a more open, flexible, and equitable system that better reflects how creativity and innovation actually work. Okay, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for being with us. We will see you next week.
Thanks very much. See ya. Bye-bye.